We've got the Liberal frontbencher Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Steve Ciobo, with us now. Steve Ciobo, thanks for joining us there this morning, this evening I should say. I'm used to chatting to you in the morning. George Brown has said that if the Liberals pick this seat up, it'd be the equivalent of Labor picking up Kooyong or Bradfield. Is that not overdoing it, given the change in the demographic that we've seen around inner Brisbane in the last few years?
To be realistic, I mean, we go into a by-election and Bill Glasson is just a brilliant local campaigner and a brilliant potential local member. The issue that we've really got, though, is that typically the situation is that in a by-election you get a 5% swing against the government. So I don't think it is an exaggeration what Senator Brand has said. The reality is that ultimately in a by-election when you are in government, it's stacked against you. So we've got a lot of work to do if Bill's going to deliver a victory tonight.
And Steve Ciobo, what do you see as is there any glimmer of hope there? The numbers were down, according to the people that we've spoken to. Senator Brandis again suggesting the turnout was low. Does that give Bill Glasson any hope today? The early numbers suggest a slight swing to him.
Well, look, I mean, I do think that it of course, a lot of people would say helps the coalition if the turnout is a little bit lower. Ultimately, though, I think people make their decision based on local issues, and we reinforce the point repeatedly that what we wanted to make sure the people of Griffith understood was that they'd be better off with a strong local member than with another union hack or another union lawyer. Ultimately, though, with this particular by-election, if the numbers are down, and I've heard estimates of it being 70 or 75%. The reality is that could help to make a difference, because if there are fewer Labor voters out, then that means that alternatively the coalition is in a stronger position. To me, Kieran, though, the real question is why would there be fewer Labor voters out? And I really think that there's a couple of factors at play there. One is that Bill Glasson has a great reputation on the ground, and I think people would be worried about wanting to necessarily vote against him. But secondly, I'm not sure that the Labor Party has really instilled confidence back into people to mobilise them to come out in force and to vote Labor.
Steve Ciobo, we'll come back to you later on tonight. Thanks so much for giving us your thoughts at this early stage of the count. Let's go to the Federal Coalition frontbencher. Steve Ciobo is with us now at the LNP event here tonight. How are you feeling with these sort of results? Half the votes now counted there in Griffith.
Well, look, I mean, this is really encouraging signs. I mean, any way you cut it, I mean, I don't know whether Bill Glasson is going to get there this evening or tomorrow or not. But the reality is this. We are looking at a result now where there's actually been a swing against the Labor opposition. And that's extraordinary, David. I mean, to have effectively the course of history turned on its head, where there hasn't been a swing toward the government in a by-election for a very long time, when the average swing is against the government 5 or 6%. So in many respects, this is a credit to Bill Glasson and the hard work that he's done on the ground, the great local candidate that he is. But it also is, to some extent, a slap in the face to Bill Short and the Labor Party. To actually have the swing towards the government is extraordinary. And I note that in terms of the primary vote, this is actually a lower primary vote for Labor than it was in 1996 when Kevin Rudd lost the seat.
But Steve Ciobo, you know, in politics, what counts is if you're in Parliament. Terry Butler will be there. That sort of commentary will fall away pretty quickly. Labor's got held on to that seat. That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Well, look, Kieran, the reality is that this was, prior to the last federal election, the safest Labor seat in Queensland for the Labor Party. We now have an extraordinary situation where 6 months into the coalition and the Abbott government, when we've had to do a number of unpopular things because they're in the national interest, we now have a situation where Labor's primary vote has actually swung toward the coalition in a by-election, which is basically almost unprecedented. In addition to that, you've got a situation where you actually actually have Labor voters, and I've been hearing this anecdotally from booth workers and from on the booths, where a lot of Labor voters weren't prepared to stick by Labor on this by-election, and you're seeing that translate in terms of a swing to the coalition. So we may not get Bill across the line. It would be a shame if we don't. But either way you cut it, the fact is this is a really good result, at least at this early stage of the night, for the coalition.
Steve Ciobo, thanks so much. We'll catch up later. Michael. Right now, though, I'm told we've got Steve Ciobo, the Liberal frontbencher, with us there from Griffith at the LNP function. Steve Ciobo, thanks for joining us once again tonight. Bill Glasson didn't concede defeat tonight. Do you really think this gap can be closed with postal votes?
Well, look, I mean, it's still obviously a possibility. Bill himself conceded tonight that it's going to be difficult for him ultimately to win the seat, but not impossible. But, you know, really, I think the telling part of this evening's result as far as the coalition's concerned is, from our perspective, this just demonstrates, as I said, an almost unprecedented result, only 3 or 4 times in Australia's history, a swing to the government. And as far as the coalition is concerned, this just highlights what we've been saying for some time now about Bill Shorten and the Labor Party, which is that they've stopped listening to the Australian people. Their scare campaign failed. And as a consequence, we saw a swing actually towards the coalition.
Well, there are other factors to contemplate here, though, aren't there, Steve Ciobo? The big one being that last time in September, Bill Glasson was up against a Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd. This time he's up against a fresh face, a candidate who's not run before, in Terry Butler. His vote has gone up, but not enough to close that 3% gap.
But this is the point, though. The reality is that by-election results have been consistent throughout Australian history, and they consistently deliver a swing to the opposition of between 4 and 5%. So the coalition, and certainly we're all feeling quite buoyed at tonight's result, because it really is a demonstration of faith to some extent in the coalition, but also importantly it's a repudiation of Bill Shorten and their scare campaign tactics. Instead of campaigning on strong local issues, instead of campaigning on cost of living, they instead ran around the electorate talking about and talking up a scare campaign, and lo and behold the coalition actually had a swing to it. And I'm willing to concede at this stage it doesn't look like enough to get Bill across the line, but that should not detract from how strong a result this is for the coalition.
Let me just ask you, frankly, is this just a tactic, not conceding defeat tonight, a tactic so that you can say it was too tight on the night?
Look, no, absolutely not. I mean, Bill not conceding tonight is a simple fact, and that is that he could still win it. There's about 15,000 postal votes from what I understand. That's a lot of postal votes that are still yet to be counted. We've seen at least a 0.7% swing to the coalition. The reality is that depending on when those postal votes were lodged, at which point in the campaign, people may have been polling more strongly one way or another, and so I still think there's a real chance that Bill could take it. I'm not saying that it's likely, but I do think that it's a real chance.
In terms of the implications, though, of this, it's a bit of drama to start the year, Steve, but the commentary around it's going to fall away pretty quick. The status quo remains in the House of Representatives. It's not really, you're saying it should reflect in the coalition tonight, saying it reflects badly on Shorten, but it doesn't really, does it? The status quo remains. Labor holds the seat. We move on.
I don't agree, Kieran. I mean, Bill Shorten would love to have gone into Parliament with his chest puffed out and said, what a stinging victory it was for the Labor Party, a striking victory for the Labor Party and a stinging defeat for the coalition. But he can't do that. I mean, any way you cut this, tonight's result is up there in terms of only having 3 or 4 results in Australian history that mirror tonight's result. Any way you cut it, to not have a 4 or 5% swing toward the Labor Party, especially when Labor's running around with their scare campaign about Medicare and running around saying that there were going to be all sorts of vicious cuts under the coalition. What this shows is that it's nothing but a scare campaign, and as Bill himself said tonight in his speech, the Australian people, we fundamentally believe, are sick of the negativity in the scare campaign from Labor. It's time they got with the program, looked at the positive results we're achieving already. I mean, we haven't had a vote for 50 days. We're doing what we can to abolish the world's biggest carbon tax. We're getting Labor's budget blowout back under control, and I think that speaks volumes in the electorate, and that's the reason why the people were willing to back us in more numbers today than they did at the last election.
Steve Ciobo, thank you very much for that and for this evening.